ثالثة على المولى بعبد الله الحسين بأعلى أصواتكم تؤجرون.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. In the name of Allah, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon the most purified of the holy prophets, Muhammad, and the purified members of his household and progeny. And may God's peace and blessings be upon Imam al-Hussein and the companions and the family members who sacrificed their lives with him. From everything that we have been talking about in the previous nights, what we have tried to establish is that our religion needs a lot of faith and a lot of knowledge to understand our duties. And performing our duties accordingly requires a tremendous amount of determination and courage on our parts. This is all related to the Muslim and to the Shi'i with themselves. For tonight we wanted to look at the duties or the relationship that we have to establish as Shia and as Muslims living in these Western societies with these societies. There are many claims nowadays being made against Islam, saying that Islam is flawed at an ideological level, in the sense that it is incompatible, it doesn't align with Western societies, because it doesn't recognize any other system of belief outside of itself. In other words, they say that because Islam considers itself to be the only truth, that it is not able to coexist, to be in the same place and at the same time with any other kind of system. If we want to look at this issue, if we want to answer this claim, there are a number of angles that we can take. One of those angles is to look at what we can call the epistemological level. So we analyze the theory of knowledge behind this. What kind of worth, what kind of merit does Islam give to theories of knowledge and to systems that are outside of it? And then we link this to the doctrines and the ideological teachings of Islam, and in simple terms, basically that kind of analysis would lead us to say whether a person can still go to heaven or not, if they are Muslim or not. That's one way to look at it. Let's call it a theological way. But in reality, this is not the issue. The issue of societies that attack Islam in this way is not whether we say as Muslims that they will end up in heaven or hell. The issue is whether Islam can coexist in a society that is not Islamic. So the issue is more at a social level. In practical terms, can Islam translate itself in societies that are not Islamic? Modern societies, especially Western societies, tell the world that they had to learn the hard way to reach the right formula for coexistence in society. They tell the world that they had to go through many wars and many tragedies that forced them to realize that the only way for different people to exist together in a society is to recognize human beings as human beings first. And with time, this is what led to the development of the United Nations and to the development of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as examples. The point here, the objective, was to recognize the dignity of humanity itself, of humanness. First, we established that you're a human, and if we all agree that everybody is a human, then everybody is entitled to the same rights. Everything else becomes secondary. The claim is that Islam is not able to do this, because the primary objective of Islam is faith. So long as a human being has not accepted that faith, they remain worthless. It is only after they have accepted the Islamic faith that they gain respect and dignity to be treated as a human being. That's the claim. So how do we answer this? As we said yesterday, and I believe we have to always start when we answer anything that has to do with Islam with this introduction. First, please make sure to distinguish between Muslims and Islam. That's always rule number one. Do not equate the actions of those who claim to be Muslims with the divine set of teachings that were revealed to humanity and that we call Islam. They're two different things. If there are people nowadays on earth who claim to be Muslims and who act in a certain way that corroborates, that supports this claim, this doesn't necessarily mean that this is what Islam is teaching. So before we say that this is what Islam says or not, we have to keep in mind the distinction between what some say and do under the name of Islam and what Islam actually teaches. And as always, due to lack of time, we'll concentrate on very important elements only, starting with the Quran. If we look at the Quranic verses, can we find any verses that tell us that in Islam the dignity and the respect are for the human being? Or is every instance of respect and dignity only and always to the Muslim and to the faithful? A first verse that may help us in this, in Surah Al-Ahzab, the Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالِ فَأَبَيْنَ أَن يَحْمِلْنَهَا وَأَشْفَقْنَ مِنْهَا وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانُ. And in English, indeed we presented the trust or the covenant to the heavens and to the earth and to the mountains, but they did not accept it, and they were apprehensive of it. But the human being accepted it. And in this verse, we can already sense that there's something special about a human being. Already, the Holy Quran is making a distinction between being a human and not a human. Not between being a faithful and a non-human. A second verse that perhaps is a little bit more clear. In Surah Al-Isra, the Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ وَرَزَقْنَاهُم مِّنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَفَضَّلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْنَا تَفْضِيلًا. Certainly we have honored the children of Adam and carried them over land and sea and provided them with all the good things, and have preferred them over many of what we have created with a complete preference. The verse is talking about the children of Adam in general, the preference, the favor, the distinction that is being mentioned is once again not about being a Muslim or being a faithful. It is about being one of the children of Adam, in other words, being a human being. Yet another verse. The Quran says, وَأَن لَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى وَأَنَّ سَعْيَهُ سَوْفَ يُرَى. And to the human there belongs nothing except what he has endeavored to do, and what he has endeavored will be seen. In this verse we start to see how the Quran looks at the worth of a human being. Before looking at the worth of the Muslim or the believer, what does the Quran say about a human being in general? It says the worth of a human being can be measured by the worth of his actions, which is exactly what we have in some of the sayings of Ahl al-Bayt. For instance, Imam Ali, peace upon him, says, قِيمَةُ كُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا يُحْسِنُهُ. The worth, the merit, the value of every person is equal to those beautiful things and to those good deeds that he performs. So this very quickly gives us an idea of the theory, at least in general terms, of what our religion says regarding the humanness or the humanity of a person. But is this enough? Let's go to the practical aspect now. We have in our narrations, at a time, people came to Imam al-Sadiq, peace upon him, and these were Shia, asking the Imam, peace upon him, how are they supposed to live in a society where they are a minority? How are they supposed to interact with the rest of the Muslim community when there are so many differences between them? And in one of the ahadith, the Imam instructs his followers by saying, فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالْوَرَعِ وَالْإِجْتِهَادِ وَاشْهَدُوا الْجَنَائِزِ وَعُودُوا الْمَرْضَى وَاحْضَرُوا مَعَ قَوْمِكُمْ فِي مَسَاجِدِهِمْ لِلصَّلَاةِ وَأَحِبُّوا لِلنَّاسِ مَا تُحِبُّوا لِأَنفُسِكُمْ أَمَا يَسْتَحْيِي الرَّجُلُ مِنْكُمْ أَنْ يَعْرِفَ جَارُهُ حَقَّهُ وَلَا يَعْرِفُ حَقَّ جَارِهِ. In English, the Imam first starts by saying, so hold on to piety and constant effort in God's way. And then he says, and these are the social instructions that we want to apply in our reality as well, because we happen to be a minority not only in the greater Islamic community, but also in Western secular societies. The Imam says, peace upon him, and attend funerals, and visit those who are sick, and pray in their mosques, and like for all people what you like for yourselves. This is very important. If you don't want people to commit blasphemy against what you hold sacred, then do not commit blasphemy against what they hold sacred. And then the Imam asks this question, rhetorical question. Does the man among you not find it shameful that his neighbor respects his rights, but he does not respect the rights of his neighbor? So basically the Imam is saying that there is a mutual, a reciprocal relationship of respect that has to be established with your neighbor, with anyone else in society, so long as you're not being attacked openly with anything. And if we want to take a cue from this hadith, where the Imam is mentioning the example of being a neighbor, we can look at neighborhood in Islam. So very quickly, a few narrations, a few ahadith, Islamic teachings about neighborhood in Islam. We have in the testament of the commander of the faithful, Imam Ali, peace upon him, these are his last words. And in those last words, he takes time to mention neighborhood in Islam. He says, Allah, Allah fi jiranikum fa innahum wasiyyatu nabiyyikum. ما زال يوصي بهم حتى ظننا أنه سيورثهم. The Imam says, by God, take care of your neighbors, for they are your Prophet's will. He mentioned them so much that we were sure he was going to include them as heirs or the inheritors in Islam. Basically making neighbors equal to family members. And of course this is in complete alignment with a hadith that we have from the Prophet, peace upon him himself, where he says in one of the sayings, Jibreel always used to advise me to be generous with my neighbors, till I thought that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to include the neighbors among the heirs of Muslims. So the same notion, but this time the Prophet recounts it on behalf of God. Now, when Islam is talking about the rights of neighborhood, is it making a distinction between whether your neighbor is a Muslim or a non-Muslim? No. It's saying if you have a neighbor, this is the right way to behave with them. And in case that anyone would come and claim, no, it is implied that your neighbor is a Muslim, we actually have a narration from the Holy Prophet where he says that neighbors are of three types. Some of them have one right over you, some of them have two rights over you, and some of them have three rights over you. Neighbors who have three rights over you are your neighbors who also happen to be a Muslim and who also happen to be a relative. And neighbors who have two rights over you are neighbors who have, in addition to being your neighbor, they are either non-Muslim or non-relative. And then, obviously, neighbors who have one right over you are the ones who are simply your neighbor without being a Muslim and without being your relative. And yet, Islam says they still have the right of neighborhood over you. This is actually mentioned explicitly in the Quran. In one of the verses, God says, وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَبِذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْجَارِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْجَارِ الْجُنُبِ وَالصَّاحِبِ بِالْجَنْبِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ وَمَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. So the Quran says, and worship God, and do not associate any partners with Him, and be good to the parents, to the relatives, to the orphans, to the needy. And then here are, let's say, two different big interpretations for وَالْجَارِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْجَارِ الْجُنُبِ. The first one, they say, al-qurba is your next door neighbor, and the second one is your distant neighbor. And we have in our narrations a prophet saying that so long as it's within 40 houses on every direction, those are your neighbors. A second interpretation says that your neighbor, the qurba, is your relative, and the other one is a stranger. We also have two more narrations that we can mention here. The first one from the Holy Prophet where he says, a man who claims to be of my followers and who has a neighbor asleep while being hungry beside him cannot claim to be one of my followers. He is not of me, as the Prophet says. Another narration comes from Imam al-Sadiq from Risalat al-Huquq, from the Treaty of Rights, where the Imam explains your rights to your neighbors. He says, protect his interest when he is absent. Show him respect when he is present. Help him when he is inflicted with any injustice. Do not remain on the lookout to detect his faults. And if by chance you happen to know any undesirable thing about him, hide it from others. And at the same time, try to desist him from improper habits if there is any chance he will listen to you. Never leave him alone at any calamity. Forgive him if he has done any wrong. Basically, the Imam is saying use the highest standard of Islamic etiquette with your neighbor, regardless, once again, of whether they are Muslim or non-Muslim. So if we go back to the Quran, to summarize, can we befriend, can we be kind, and can we be just to people outside of our faith or not? We have a verse that actually answers this directly. The Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. God does not forbid you from befriending those who have not waged a religious war against you and who have not expulsed you out of your house, out of your homes and your lands, that you be kind to them first, that you be kind to them and you be just to them. And God surely loves those who are just. In this verse, the Quran makes it very clear, in case there was any confusion before or ambiguity, that Islam is always implied. In this case, the Quran is actually talking about people who are not Muslims. It's saying that you befriend them and that you be kind to them, with the exception that you're not in a self-defense situation. The claim has always been that Islam is about converting people to Islam, to gain the biggest numbers, to intimidate people with any means necessary to force them into Islam. When we look at these verses, we see that no, Islam is really not about converting people. It recognizes their dignity and their respect even outside of Islam. That's first. Secondly, Islam has never been about quantity. Islam has always been about quality. When we look at the history of the Holy Prophet, and when we look at the history of the Imams of Ahl al-Bayt, we see this loud and clear. They were not about quantity of followers. They were about quality of followers. When Imam Ali, peace upon him, after the death of Uthman, after Uthman was murdered, they came to the Imam trying to pay allegiance to him, to ask him to become the Khalifa. And remember that this is a man who had been usurped from his divine right to Khilafah for over 20 years. They come to the Imam, and his answer, his first answer, after he says there were so many people who came to me that both of my sides got ripped, he told the people, leave me alone and find someone else. And the reason he says that is because he wants to make sure that the people who are not coming from an emotional point of view. They're not reactionary. They actually believe that this is the person who has to lead them. When we look at the events of Karbala, when we see that the Imam al-Hussein, peace upon him, when he left Medina and all the way to Karbala, every time the group got big, the Imam would make a speech and remind people that this caravan was headed towards death, that people were free to leave if they wanted to. And the Imam kept going with this strategy until the last night, the 10th night, where he told his companions, why don't each and every one of you hold the hand of one of my family members and ride away the night, use the night as a camel and ride away into the darkness. Now we all agree that they had a religious duty to be with the Imam, but the Imam is telling them you can leave. The Imam tells them, you have proven your loyalty to me. You don't need to stay. And we know by that time that those who stayed wanted to be there. But the Imam wants to make sure that those who stay, it is because they're staying out of determination and free will. In Islam, there is no compulsion. The Imam will not even use shame as a factor to influence people to join him. He tells them, use the night to go away. No one will see you leaving. This is the importance of free will in Islam. This is why we do not agree when people tell us that Islam is built on intimidation and coercion. Not at all. Because this is based on the assumption that we want numbers. We never wanted numbers, we want quality. And the quality comes from inviting people to our religion based on our actions, not on our words, as Ahl al-Bayt told us. The Quran tells us that the secret of the success of the prophetic mission, of the Muhammadan mission, was that the Holy Prophet had a sublime character. The Quran tells the Prophet, had you been a rude person with a hard heart, they would have scattered away from you. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. When we go to the biographies and the history of Ahl al-Bayt, we see this manifested very clearly. When Imam Ali was in a battle with enemies trying to kill him and his army, and they were able to take control of the water, and the enemy army ran out of water, he instructed his army not to use water as a weapon. And when they told the Imam, this doesn't make sense, if we let them drink, then they're going to use it against us and we will be out of water. He told them, yes, so take the water and go serve them. This is the same thing that happened in Karbala. One of the soldiers who was in the group, the 1,000 men group fighting under the leadership of al-Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi, was called Ali ibn al-Muharibi. He says that at some point we were a group of 1,000 soldiers trying to prevent the Imam. Their whole mission was to torture and harass the Imam and the caravan, and to prevent them from reaching the water, and to push them towards the bigger army waiting for them of 70 to 100,000 men. So everybody knows that they're there to kill the Imam. And at some point, he says, the caravan of the Imam got closer to the water than we were. And by the time we reached them in midday, we were about to die of thirst. So when we got there, the Imam noticed us coming. He ordered his companions to take water, to fill the water containers, and to come and give us water. He says, I was the last one to get there. So all the companions of the Imam were already busy with the rest of the 1,000 men there. And the Imam noticed me coming and noticed his companions being busy, so he got up himself and got the water, filled the container, and came to me. And the Imam told me twice or 3 times, depending on the reports, he said something that I didn't understand, because the Imam used a dialect that man didn't understand. So the Imam himself opened the container of the water, as he says, and he poured the water in my mouth. When I was done, the Imam poured the water in the mouth of my horse. And when he was done, the Imam took water and sprinkled over us so that we may cool down. This is the etiquette of Islam. Islam recognizes the human being behind the action and behind the belief. Even if we disagree with the belief, and even if we disagree with the action, as Muslims we know that there's a human being behind that. And Islam holds that human being sacred. But it takes a lot of courage and determination and a sense of a divine light to be able to see this. We ask God to grant us a glimpse of that divine light and to enable us to have the patience and the determination to follow the true teachings of Islam. May God's peace and blessings be upon Imam al-Hussein, his family members and his companions, and upon you all. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.